my name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my new room! Going to be the first video that I'm filming in my new apartment. As you can see, things are currently very chaotic because I'm in the process of moving. I wanted to film my October wrap up because in the month of October I read 22 books and I'm very excited to tell you all about them. I actually read my favorite book that I read this year in the month of October. It was great for me. My girl Taylor Swift dropped a new album. Things are looking up. But before we do jump into the wrap up, I wanted to say a huge thank you to a new sponsor on this channel, which is EveryPlate. EveryPlate is America's best value meal kit. EveryPlate is 25% cheaper than grocery shopping, which means that you can put that money towards gifts and holiday things this holiday season. EveryPlate recipes feature high quality produce and ingredients delivered right to your front door and ready to make with 6 simple, easy steps. It's nice because their quality ingredients come pre-proportioned so that you're not gonna be wasting food, you know, like that bag of spinach I bet you threw out last week. Yeah, we all know about that bag of spinach you threw out, you know? So it's nice because everything comes pre-proportioned so you're not gonna be like wasting any food. They make it really easy for the whole family to gather because they have different things for everyone and there really is something for everyone. They have family friendly meals, they have quick and easy meals, they have meat and veggie or just veggie meals as well. You can choose whatever is best for your diet without committing to one preference. EveryPlate sent me these super smashed burgers and they were so freaking good. Like the buns were so soft. The chipotle powder in the meat was absolutely incredible. Like it was so freaking good. I thought it would be very intimidating to make this, but again, the 6 simple steps, you know, it's so easy to make. And the burgers are always a major hit with my family. You know, my family loves the burgers and they really enjoyed these too. So you can get your first box for just $1.49 per meal when you go to everyplate.com and use my code gabbyreads149. Let me repeat myself because that's an incredible deal. Oh my gosh, only $1.49 per meal when you go to everyplate.com and use my code gabbyreads149. That is up to $110 in value. What an incredible steal. Thank you so much to EveryPlate for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get into the books! Because, you know, as mentioned, I had 22 books read for the month of October. I read 4 mangas or graphic novels, and then I read 3 novellas, and then 15 full-length books. The month of October was also really exciting. Over on my Patreon, I did an exclusive video that was me and my sister reacting to Taylor Swift's new album, Midnights, which, by the way, is a top-tier album. One of my top faves that I've ever, you know, heard from Taylor Swift. It's definitely a new favorite, so that was a really fun video. It's over an hour long. If you want to go and check it out, it's over on my Patreon. Also on my Patreon this month, I did a really fun like media journal kind of video that was a Patreon exclusive where I kind of showed off my new media journal that I have and like how I've been media journaling and getting back into it. So if you want to see either of those videos, they are on the top tier of my Patreon. You can go and check it out. And if you do sign up for my Patreon just to watch those videos, you actually will get access to all of the Patreon exclusive videos that I've done so far this year. So just wanted to let you know that. I also hosted Weekend Ween Monster Mash with Olivia at the end of October. It's our, you know, usual Halloween Weekend Ween kind of readathon. And so both of those vlogs, I'll have those linked down below. I also did a few other fun vlogs during the month of October, which included a lot of reading your horror recommendations. So I'll have all of the vlogs that I've done this month linked down below. But yeah, let's just jump right into the wrap up. I think I'm gonna start with the manga and the graphic novels that I read first. So the first one I'll talk about is Blood on the Tracks. I read Blood on the Tracks Volume 1, and this was such an incredible manga. All I've heard about it so far is that it's very, you know, similar to Bates Motel, and I definitely got that with this. I feel like this is a very interesting mother and son bond that these two have, and the tension in this writing is just so intense. It's a lot of just like close-ups of their face, you know, but the way that this author is able to capture so much emotion just in the way that they look at each other, it's just very interesting. And the whole time I was reading this, I was like, oh, is this a thriller? Like maybe it's not. And then the ending of this volume happened and I was like, oh shit, like I didn't see it going that way. So now I'm very intrigued. I cannot wait to continue with the series. I think I'm gonna give this one 4 stars. And then I finally was able to read Gaio, or is it pronounced Go? I think it is pronounced Go, by Junji Ito. And this one is a manga that I've had on my TBR for quite some time because I'm really eager and I want to read all of Junji Ito's backlist because he's incredible. And so I was finally able to read this one, and this one is so like hard to explain. It's basically like these sea animals, like fish and all kinds of sea creatures, grow these like legs and can just start to walk on land, and they're starting to like, you know, harm people on land, and it's absolutely terrifying and creepy. Like this book, oh my gosh, the way it describes the like smell of the fish and like the rotting fish when they're like, you know, coming onto the land, like ugh, it's so creepy and weird. And you know, naturally with Junji Ito's writing, he's just such a great writer. Like his illustrations are seriously so gruesome and gross and disgusting. I feel like this one though, I ended up giving this one like 3 stars, I think, and that's mostly because I feel like around the halfway point, this book just starts to get a little bit like over the top and ridiculous, and I feel like Junji Ito doesn't know when to end his books, you know, like he can just go on and on and on, and I was like, okay, I think that's enough, you know, like I think that's good for me. But it was still really good, and I still can't wait to read more of his stuff. Then I also read Sweat and Soap Volume 1, and let me tell you, I know this book series, it looks kind of strange, it sounds kind of strange, but I'm obsessed. When I tell you I'm obsessed, okay, because this story, it follows this protagonist, this girl, and she has always been kind of like ashamed of the way that she smells, and then she works for this company that works on like, you know, perfumes and like body lotions and stuff like that. And so this guy is like the CEO dude or whatever of the company. He's like the one that comes up with the different scents that they're gonna be selling. And one day he smells her and he's like, oh my gosh, you smell incredible. That's like my new favorite scent ever. And she's like, what the heck? Because she's always been so ashamed and she's been like bullied for the way that she smells. And he just absolutely loves it. Like he adores her. And so at the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little creepy, you know, because he's just like, I want to sniff you. Like he's just so weird and aggressive towards her. And I was like, what the fuck am I signing in? Like, what am I signing up for right now? This is so strange. But then, oh my gosh, about halfway through the book, like, yes, it does start to feel a little insta love, but it was so cute. Like I couldn't even deal with it. Like it's such a top tier romance for me that as soon as I finished reading this volume, I ordered the next 10 volumes in the series. Like there's 11 volumes total in this series, and I literally ordered the next 10 just because of how much I loved this singular volume, which I don't know if I should, like, is that a mistake? I don't know, but I want to read them desperately. Like this was so cute. Seriously, they give me major Kath and Levi vibes from Fangirl. Like if you've read Fangirl, you might agree just by looking at them. Like she's really like shy and awkward, and she has her little glasses and her little, you know, bangs, and then he just looks very like scruffy like Levi. I don't know, this whole time I was reading it, I was like, they are the adult versions of Kath and Levi, and then I think that's part of the reason why I got so obsessed, you know? But this was 5 stars. I absolutely love it. One of my new favorite mangas, and that is so surprising. Like I wasn't expecting this to be so wholesome and so cute. And then I read The Nice House on the Lake, which this one is a graphic novel, and this is one that I just read during Monster Mash, and this was a 5-star read for me. I am obsessed with this, and I'm kind of sad because this one is volume 1, and the second volume doesn't even come out until March next year. But this was a really cool kind of like horror graphic novel where these people, you know, it opens with this guy named Walter, and he asks one of his closest friends, he's like, how do you think the world is gonna end? And it's kind of like this conversation that this woman has with this guy Walter, that's her friend. And then this guy Walter, he, you know, owns this really nice house on a lake, and he invites his 15 closest friends in the world. He's like, hey, you guys need to come to my lake. Like he's like really aggressive about the fact that they need to come to this house on the lake, and they need to come at this specific date and all of this shit. And then when all of his friends get there, they start to realize they might not be able to leave this house, and like there might be something dangerous happening out in the world. And oh my god, it was just so good. It was so weird. It was so dark. Like some of the you know, imagery throughout this was just really stunning. Like it's just so beautiful and creepy and so well done, and I was just like on the edge of my seat the whole time, like trying to figure out what the heck was gonna happen to these people. Right, and then I read 3 novellas this month. I read them all during Weekend Ween, during Monster Mash. The first one I read is And Then I Woke Up. This is one that I wanted to read because I heard it involved zombies or something, so I wanted to read this for the monster prompt. And this one's a novella that it's very weird, okay? You're following this world where like there's been this zombie apocalypse, but it's kind of like a strange plague, and it's literally unlike anything that I've ever read before. I think the highest compliment that I can give this book is that it's so unique and so cool. Like the idea in this book is so original, so different. I've never seen anything like this. I think this is such a fun and unique take on the zombie apocalypse. I feel like this book for me, it took a long time for me to get invested. It took about 40 pages before I felt like things really started to pick up. But god, the writing in this book is so beautiful. It's so stunning. It really makes you think, you know, like it's very thought-provoking writing and just really interesting. Like it was right up my alley with things that I enjoy. And then once the zombie apocalypse scene started happening after like 40 to 50 pages in, oh my god, I was so invested, so hooked. And I feel like there's kind of like almost like a twist, at least for me. There was something about the plot that I was like, oh shit, like that is unexpected and so interesting. And from that point on, I was just so invested in this. I do feel like this book suffers though from some really slow sections. Even though it's a novella and it's so short, it still feels longer than it needs to be. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars, even though I think it's freaking incredible. And if this at all sounds interesting to you, highly recommend this one. And then I also finally read They Were Here Before Us by Eric LaRocca. This is Eric LaRocca's new novella, and this one's actually a novella in pieces. So it's kind of like a bunch of different short stories throughout this little collection. It's really interesting because this collection, you know, the first like 3 to 4 short stories are really cool because they're all told from the point of view of like a bug or like an animal, and it's kind of like showing how cruel humanity can be and kind of like pointing the finger at humans and being like, look at how monstrous and awful humans can be. And so those were my favorite section. Like those first 3 short stories in this were my favorites. Like they were so good. They were so creepy and weird and disgusting. And then the last 2 short stories in this are kind of from the perspective of humans, and they were a little bit longer than the first original short stories, and I thought those ones were okay for me, but those first 3 were absolutely incredible. Like so good, so unique. I feel like Eric LaRocca is just such a freaking great writer. Like I'll say this time and time again, I think he was born to write horror. I think his writing is just absolutely incredible. It's so dark and gory and disgusting, but like in the way that you kind of want and expect with horror books. And so I gave this one 4 stars. And then the last novella that I read this month was Ghost 19. This was by Simone St. James, and this one was like a 3-hour audiobook. It was a very quick read. It's about this woman. It takes place in the 1950s, and it's about this woman who moves from the city in New York to this like small suburb, and she thinks that she's like seeing a man outside of her window, and she's kind of like spying on her neighbors a lot. And honestly, I feel like this one was just fine for me. I feel like there was definitely some creepy moments with like this whole man in the window kind of thing, and I do think it reminded me of like other books with like the way she's like spying on the neighbors and she thinks something's happening when she doesn't actually know, and they're kind of blaming it on, you know, her mental health and saying that she's not well and all that kind of stuff. But it was just okay for me. Like I feel like by the time this book ended, it was just like, oh, okay, like it's over. Like that's it, I guess. So I gave this one 3 stars. All right, and then on to all of the novels that I read this month. The first one I want to talk about is Pen Pal, which is probably one of my new favorite horror reads. I actually read this one for the vlog that I did of reading your horror recommendations. So thank you for, you know, forcing me to read this one this month. This is a really incredible and unique kind of horror book, and I've never read anything like this. I really love how this book is kind of broken up into 6 different chapters, like 6 or 7 maybe, and it's really interesting because each one is a different childhood memory of this main character, and he's trying to figure out some of the like sinister or like weird unexplained things that happened in his childhood. He's like trying to make sense of them as an adult kind of, and the way this book was written, like oh my god, this is some of the creepiest shit I think I've ever read in my life. Like there were some scenes I was literally like, what the fuck am I reading right now? Like this is so weird. And I tabbed just like so many things. I was just absolutely obsessed with this. I feel like this is one that I definitely want to reread in the future, just because I feel like I'll pick up on so much more the second time I would read this. And it was just so much fun. Like Pen Pal was so good. It was so unique. I loved it. And then the next book that I read was Gone to See the Riverman, and this is definitely an extreme horror book, okay? It's extreme. The topics covered in this book are very uncomfortable and very dark and disturbing to an extreme, okay? It's extreme horror for a reason. This isn't one that I would go around lightly recommending to anybody that enjoys horror because it's a lot to stomach and it's really gross. And the themes in this book that are explored were kind of unexpected because I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing. But this one, we're following this woman who, you know, really idolizes this guy who's a serial killer. It's this guy named Edmund, and he's currently in prison, and she's like writing him letters and he's writing her back letters, and they're like kind of like love letters. Like she just really idolizes this man, and then he asks her to go to this cabin in the woods and go and retrieve this key to deliver to the Riverman. And it's all this like weird kind of mysterious vague thing happening, right? And so she decides to take her sister along on this trip, and then we kind of get to see this trip that she's taking when she's going off to see the Riverman. And then she also has her sister there with her, so that's happening. And there's also like flashbacks to her childhood, and we kind of get to explore more about her character. And this book was just fucked up, okay? It was some fucked up shit. Like this was a hard read, but I feel like I gave this one 4.5 stars. And I feel like I gave it that rating because I was so invested. I was like flipping the pages, like I had to know where this shit was going. It had me hooked from the beginning until the end, and I was just so disgusted and also fascinated and like grossed out and just like, what the fuck? So I don't even know what to say about this book. It was so wild. The next book that I read was The Ritual by Adam Neville. This is the one that I checked out from the library, so I don't have the copy with me anymore, but this is another book that I read for reading your horror recommendations, and unfortunately this one didn't go as well for me as the other two did, and I wasn't sure if it would because I have read a book from this author before, and I'm just kind of positive now that this author is not for me. I feel like his writing in horror is just really boring in my opinion, or at least with this one I found it to be very boring. But we're following these four men who are on this trip and they get kind of like lost in the wilderness and there's a lot of chaotic things going on. I just thought this book was way too long for what the story is about. Like I just thought it got really long-winded and just so boring, and also I'm not a huge fan of the way the women were written in this book, or just with the way that this author writes women in general. It just doesn't sit right with me, and so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. It's definitely not one of my top faves. Unlike the next book that I read this month, which was Daphne by Josh Malerman, and I'm so happy to report that this was a 5-star book for me. Definitely one of my new favorite Josh Malermans, which was so unexpected. I mean, I say it's unexpected because when I originally picked this book up, I literally considered DNFing it a few times. In the first like 50 to 60 pages, I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like the writing was very hard to get into. The writing is very like stream of consciousness with this main, you know, protagonist. We're just following this young girl, Kit, who plays on this basketball team in high school, and all the high school students say that there's, you know, this local legend of this woman named Daphne, who she went to the school like in the 80s and she got bullied really aggressively, and now she like haunts the school's basketball team. Woman Daphne who like haunts the school, and she's like this 7-foot tall like woman with hair like covering her face and like greasy fingernails, and like, oh my god, the descriptions of this Daphne character, absolutely horrifying, like so creepy. There were so many good moments in this book where I was just like so disturbed and freaked out. But also you know, our main character Kit in this book, she suffers from some pretty bad anxiety, and I found her to be incredibly relatable, and I feel like it's really interesting to me when this kind of monster Daphne can almost represent almost like a metaphor at this character's own anxiety, like the fear. I think the way this book is written too is just so goddamn beautiful. Like there were so many great, you know, moments of like talking about how growing up can be so hard and kind of can give you so much anxiety when you're like forced to make these decisions about your future when you're just like an 18-year-old kid and you have no idea. It was just so good. It was so well written. It was so thoughtful, and it was so creepy. Like it was so well done. 5 stars. I loved it. And then I also read The Dead Romantics. I don't have my copy because I'm lending it to my mom right now because I'm obsessed with this book, because this was another 5-star read for me. And in this book we're following this woman named Florence, who is a ghostwriter for like a really big romance author, but she recently just got dumped in like a horrific breakup. She dealt with this really awful breakup and now she doesn't know if she believes in love anymore. And then right at the start of this book, something really awful happens in her family, and so she's like kind of forced to go home. And the thing that makes this book really cool is that our main character Florence can see ghosts. Okay, that's what makes it cool. It's like paranormal romance because she can see ghosts, she has interactions with ghosts, and it's just really cool and really unique. I feel like this book is so unique, and that's like one of the biggest compliments I can give it, because I've never read a romance quite like this one, and I feel like that's rare to do these days. You know, I feel like it's almost like everything's been done before, and then you read something like this and you're like, this is amazing, this is different. It's almost like it reads kind of like Emily Henry's like kind of fun bantery writing, but if there were ghosts, and it just makes it even more fun for me. This book was also emotional as fuck. Oh my god, if you're dealing with like the loss of a loved one or like grief, this might be a really hard book to read, because I was crying. I cried multiple times reading this one, but it was so freaking good and so cute, and I just loved it so much. So The Dead Romantics, 5 stars. I can't wait to reread this one. This might become like my October go-to romance, you know? It was that good. All right, and then next up I read Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This one is a kind of mystery thriller time travel kind of story where we're following this woman who one night she like looks out her window and she witnesses her 17-year-old son murdering someone, just like stabbing someone in the street, and she doesn't recognize who this person is that he's stabbing, and she's kind of like totally freaked the fuck out, as anyone would be. And then the next day she wakes up and it's like the day before the murder happened, and she's like, what the heck? And then it's like this time jumping thing where like every day, the next day that she wakes up, it's like 2 days before the murder and then 3 days before the murder, and she thinks that she's been given like a chance to prevent this murder from ever happening in the first place. So very unique and interesting premise. I love kind of thrillers that explore this idea of like time jumping or time travel in some way. So I was very invested in this book because of that. But at the same time, I feel like I didn't personally care about any of these characters very much. It's just very hard for me to stay invested in the story because I feel like this book just starts to go in a direction where I'm like, okay, damn, like we're going way back. Like we're going way back. And I just started to slowly lose interest over time. It's too much for me. I just got really bored. And so I ended up giving this one 3 stars. And then the next book that I read is probably maybe my favorite book that I've read so far this year. I absolutely love this book with my whole freaking heart. And that is We Spread by Ian Reid. And this book impacted me emotionally in a way that I struggle to even explain to you now. If you would like to see my full reading vlog kind of discussing this book, I'll have it linked down below because in that vlog, I literally bawled my eyes out as soon as I finished this book. Like I cried like I don't think I've ever cried over a book the way that I cried over this one. I don't know what the fuck it was about that ending that just really hit me. But I also do discuss my spoilery thoughts on this book and why it's my favorite book that I've read this year. But this one is a horror novel. It's not exactly horror. I don't really know, to be honest, what kind of genre I would even categorize this as, but we follow this woman named Penny who is, you know, living in her home. She's recently lost her partner in life and she's kind of struggling with her memory. She's starting to lose her grip on time and on her like place in the world. Like her memory is starting to slip. And so she gets put into this old person's home. While she's at the home, she doesn't know if she can trust the people that are working there. And it's almost this question of like, is something sinister actually happening at this place? Or is it just Penny and her mind and her memory making her think that something sinister is happening at that place? And honestly, that is absolutely terrifying to me. I feel like that is the scariest thing in the world to me. Aging and losing my own memory is definitely one of my biggest fears in life. And I don't think I fully even confronted that fear until I read this book. I feel like if you have someone in your life that has dementia or Alzheimer's, I feel like this is going to be a really difficult read for you because oh my god, it was such a hard read for me. Like I was literally bawling my eyes out at the end of this book because it was just so hard and so scary. But I feel like this book was so powerful. It was so well written. Some of the most thought-provoking, interesting things that I've ever read. And it just really made me think. And I annotated so much at the end of this book. Like I annotated to the point where I was just writing like pages of notes in the back, which is kind of a rare thing for me. Like I don't really annotate that much these days, but this book just really sparked something in me where I was just like absolutely inspired and floored, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I know this book won't be for everyone. I know there will probably be a handful of people that will read this and they'll be pissed off at the ending, but I loved it so much. Ian Reid, top tier author, what the heck. All right, and then the next book that I read this month was Hex. This is the first book that I read for the second round of reading your horror recommendations, and this was really interesting and really unique. In this story, we're following this small town where there's this witch that haunts the small town, but nobody else in the world kind of like knows about this. But it's very interesting and weird because she's this witch that she has her like eyes and her mouth sewn shut, which is really creepy to think about. But it's weird because she doesn't really do much in this town. You know, she just kind of like walks around the town. She kind of shows up in kids' rooms sometimes, but otherwise she's not very violent and she doesn't really do a whole lot. But in this story, we're following these teenagers who, you know, they want to try and like film her and have a video of her go viral on the internet, and they want the world to know about this witch. And this story was fine. I think the first half was really interesting for me, and I even thought it could be a new favorite because I was like, wow, this is so cool. I've never read anything like this before. And I just thought the premise was so unique, you know, and so interesting. But I feel like this book just suffers from being a little bit too long. Like there's just too much going on in the story that I didn't care about. We're following quite a bit of characters. Like we're following a lot of different characters in the town, but also there was just a lot of really weird like nipple violence in this book and like violence with boobs. It was just very strange. I was like, why, sir? What is going on? Like why? And so that was very uncomfortable to read. I don't know. It was just fine for me. I gave this one 3 stars. And then I read The Exorcist's House by Nick Roberts, and this one was not the best time for me, if I'm being honest. This one is about this family who in 1994, they buy this house that's like out in the middle of nowhere. And shortly after arriving there, they start to realize that this house has like a lot of weird history. And it was actually owned by this guy who would perform exorcisms in the house, I guess. It's like some weird stuff that is happening in the basement. There's, you know, just a whole lot of horrific things with this family. And this book the idea was fine, you know, the idea of it was really interesting, but I feel like the writing in this book, it just was not for me. Like the writing was just not very well done, in my opinion. I did talk about this more in the vlog that I did. Like I read some direct quotes from this book about why I think the writing is just so bad. But yeah, so if you want to see that, I'll have that vlog linked down below. And then the next book that I read is Old Country. This is one that I also did check out for my library, and I also did listen to this one on audio. But this is another kind of story where there's a couple that buys a new house that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and their closest neighbors are a mile down the road. But then the neighbors, one night they come over and they let them know, like, hey, just so you guys know, there is a spirit that kind of haunts this valley where your house is. And it's really cool because in each different season, the spirit kind of like changes its form for like how it haunts the land, which I thought was actually really interesting. It was really unique. I don't think I've ever read quite something like this in horror where like a spirit changes the way that it haunts them depending on the season and the year. Like, I don't know, I just thought the concept of this one was really fascinating and really unique. However, I feel like this book kind of suffers from being repetitive, you know, because I feel like once you know how the spirit haunts something in a certain season, those scenes just start to get really repetitive because then it's just like the same thing happening over and over and over again. As intrigued as I was, you know, in the first half of this book, I feel like in the second half, I was just like getting kind of bored with it. Once it hit the fall season, I was just like, okay, I'm kind of bored now. And then also I wasn't a huge fan of the way this one ended. So I feel like I gave this one 3 stars. I don't know if that's like too generous, but I did enjoy so much of this book. Like the way that the spirit would haunt them in the summertime, absolutely terrifying. Like one of the most weird things in a horror book that I've ever read. I was obsessed. Okay, I was obsessed with what was happening in the summertime. But once it hit fall and like towards the end of the book, I just got really bored with it. So then the next book that I read was The Marsh Queen, and this is a book that I read for a video that I did with Aardvark Book Club. If you missed that, I'll have it linked down below. It was like a fun 24-hour reading vlog, unboxing kind of thing. And this is the book that I chose to read for that. This one is kind of like a historical fiction mystery kind of story. It's very similar to Where the Crawdads Sing. It definitely compares itself to Where the Crawdads Sing, and it's 100% accurate. Like I think if you liked Where the Crawdads Sing, you would definitely like this. But I think similarly to how I felt about Where the Crawdads Sing, like that one was a 3-star book for me. I didn't really fully understand the hype with that one. And this one I kind of feel the same about. This one's also a 3-star book for me. This one we're following this woman named Lonnie, who is an accomplished bird artist, and she's living in Washington, D.C. And then she gets this phone call from her brother that her mother's been in an accident and she needs to come back home to help the family take care of the mother. And so then it's about how she's going back to, you know, the marsh in Florida where she grew up. It's interesting though because when she gets back home, you know, her father had died in this weird like drowning accident, and they had always thought it was an accident the way her father died, but then she gets this like cryptic message that says like you need to know the truth about what happened to him. And it's kind of like interesting because then it involves this mystery about like, okay, well, what actually happened to her dad, and is there more, you know, actually going on than we know about? And this one definitely had that vibe of Where the Crawdads Sing, where it's like the whole town has all of these secrets and it seems like people are against her. And it was really interesting. I really liked the mystery aspect of this book. I just felt like I couldn't really connect with this family very much. And I remember feeling the same way about Where the Crawdads Sing, but I do feel like if you enjoyed that one, you would probably really enjoy this one as well. And then the next book that I read is The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. And this one is the latest new young adult horror novel from Tiffany D. Jackson. I think this is my 3rd or maybe 4th book from this author. I really, really love her stuff. This one is actually kind of like a Carrie retelling. It's really interesting because right at the beginning of this book, you hear about the night of the prom, you know, and they're like saying how there was only like 1 or 2 students that survived this prom. And so it immediately kind of like grips you and makes you like, wait, what the fuck is going on here? And then you kind of get this story about this girl named Maddie who, you know, it's kind of like hard to understand in the beginning because it takes place in the year 2014, but it's weird because the school still has segregated proms. So they have like a black prom and then they have a white prom. And in the beginning of this book, it's kind of like an awful situation for Maddie because she's been able to get away as like a white passing student for all this time. But then the students at the school discover that she's black and they start treating her differently because of that. And this book was absolutely fascinating. Like it was so well done. And I'm so glad that I love this because I wasn't the biggest fan of Carrie. Like I wanted to love Carrie so badly when I read it, but I thought it was just fine for me. But then reading this is like everything that I wanted Carrie to be. So I ended up really enjoying this one. I also, side note, would highly recommend the audiobook for this one because the audiobook is fantastic. It's so cool because there's like a podcast element to this book, and the sound of the podcast used in the audiobook was just so cool. It sounded like real interviews were being done with like people that were involved in the events. And it was just so freaking cool, and you get so many different point of views from like all the different students in the school, which I know some people have criticized this book for, and they said they wanted it to be more told just from Maddie's point of view, which I can definitely see, but I actually liked, you know, seeing all the different points of views of all the different students in the book. I just thought it made it more engaging, it made it more fast-paced for me, and I really love this one. I wanted to give this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's not my favorite from Tiffany D. Jackson. I think Grown is still my favorite from her, but this is a close second. Like, this one was so good. And then the next book that I read was Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This was actually my booktube pick for the month of October, and I did a live show with my friend Mandy that I will have linked down below, which has all of our thoughts discussing this book. But I feel like this is another horror novel that is so incredibly unique, and I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this done before, which is exciting, you know? Because in this book, we're following this woman named Vera who is, you know, coming back home to her mother to take care of her mother as it's nearing the end of her life, it seems. And she's back in this home where she grew up in this home as a kid, and her dad built this home with his hands. This house is very much a character in this story in a way, you know, like the house itself feels like a character. And this book has some of the most beautiful, like flowery kind of writing that I've ever read. Like, it was really gorgeous. It's like almost every single sentence is a metaphor in a way. I feel like that can make it kind of overwhelming to read at times, but the way it was done was just so beautiful. I also love that we get flashbacks of Vera's childhood throughout the book, and I actually thought, you know, the chapters when we're reading when she was a kid, like 11 to 13 years old, I actually thought those were like my favorite chapters in the book because I was so fascinated and simultaneously disgusted by what was happening in those chapters when she was a kid. It was just so freaking good and so interesting. And the ending of this book was very shocking. I still don't fully know how I feel about the ending, but at the same time, I really appreciate when an author can take a risk with an ending like this and kind of do something that I don't think has ever been done before. I talked about this with Mandy in the live show, but I was saying how, you know, I really respect when an author can take a risk and know that the ending is going to be, you know, kind of divisive among the readers and not everyone's going to love it, but I love that so much. So much of horror can be the same these days, and I love seeing something that's so unique and so different and just so bizarre. And so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. And then the next book that I read was Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. This is the same author as Cackle, and this is one that I read during Monster Mash. It was an audiobook that I listened to, and this one is this like horror novel where we're following this woman who gets turned into a werewolf, or she starts to turn into a werewolf. There's like an accident that happens at the beginning where she accidentally hits a werewolf and then it attacks her, and then she slowly starts like acting strange, and her behavior starts to get all strange because she's slowly starting to turn into a werewolf. And this book was just so entertaining. I don't know, there was just something about it that was really entertaining for me. I loved the sister relationship in this book and just all of the characters in general. Like, there was just a really great group of characters in this book, and it was so much fun to listen to on audio. I was just really in the mood for something like this as I was reading it, so it could not be the more perfect read for me at the time. I think I gave this one 4 stars. And then the last book that I read this month was Suburban Hell. So in Suburban Hell, this one's kind of another almost like comedy horror type of book where we're following this group of suburban moms who are all living in this neighborhood, and one of their friends, they think she's starting to get possessed, and then it kind of turns into this like kind of exorcism horror. And this book was really entertaining. I love the idea of like following a group of moms in the suburbs. It was very funny and very entertaining. It really reminded me a lot of like, you know, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It definitely had that kind of vibe where it's like suburban moms can take on evil kind of thing, you know? This book ended up being okay for me. I feel like the reason why I didn't end up enjoying it as much is because I just don't love reading about exorcisms. I just find it to be so kind of like boring and repetitive, and I feel like it always follows like the same kind of storyline and like the same kind of solution, and I just don't find reading or watching, you know, exorcisms to be very entertaining. It just was not my favorite thing, and I didn't really know that that's what this book was going to be about when I started it. But overall, I thought this book was fine. I still gave it 3 stars because it was a really quick and fun listen, especially like around Halloween time. I just think this was the perfect read, but also I would recommend reading this one in the summer because most of it does take place around like 4th of July time and in the summer. So I think this might be the perfect like summer spooky read. Those are the 22 books that I read in the month of October. I know it was quite a lot, but I discovered so many new favorites this month. Like, it's been a long time since I've had that many 5 stars in a row, and the fact that I read my favorite book that I've read this year in October. Come on, Midnights by Taylor Swift came out, which also might be my favorite Taylor Swift album yet. Like, what? I'm sorry, excuse me? Like, I still haven't decided, you know, like, I need to listen to it even more. I need to develop memories with these songs before I can determine if it's my all-time fave. Taylor Swift did not come to play, okay? Like, this album is so good, so top tier, and I'm just obsessed. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Let me know, how many books did you read in the month of October? What was your favorite book that you read this month? And also, I can't wait to, you know, show you my new apartment and to film more videos in this room. I'm just so excited. I love the lighting in here. I just think it's so beautiful and it's gonna be so great. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.